Good people, I'm Dmitry, welcome to another video. This is the Zadok Moab 2 Elite, a really ambitious concept of integrating water cooling inside the enclosure of like the actual frame being the distribution block for water cooling. And I appreciate their ambitious direction, but this is one of the worst experiences I've had in building a computer in a really long time. The thing is, from the very beginning of unboxing this case, the experience didn't feel as premium as it should be for the expected price point. I don't even want to tell you until the very end of the video. I mean, the thing is, it doesn't even come with an instructions manual. So that would be your first little light bulb moment that this might not be as premium as it should be. This here is actually the second copy of the case because I had so many issues with the first model, I had to get the replacement. It really pains me to bring down this brand and this product because the concept is so cool, but my gosh, the execution here needs to be refined literally on every level. So let's review right after this.
The Z490 Phantom Gaming ITX from ASRock is the perfect compact motherboard to pair with your Intel 10 Gen CPU. It features an aluminum alloy heatsink with an active fan, Thunderbolt 3 support, and higher quality MOSFETs to favor overclocking. Plus you get 2.5G LAN, Wi-Fi 6, a robust M.2 heatsink, and a high quality DAC built in. Check it out down below.
All right, so first of all, let's begin with the design because I love this open concept of an enclosure. I would love to see more of that in 2021. The entire left side of your components, like your motherboard, the CPU block, and the GPU will be completely exposed, giving you this showpiece element, which I appreciate. I mean, I've done a system with the Z11, which is all about showmanship and displaying your hardware, and that's exactly what we have here with the Zadok enclosure as well. The GPU is in the vertical orientation, completely open air, so GPU temperatures should be absolutely perfect in terms of it simulating an open bench environment. Up to 280mm GPUs are supported though, so GPU length, I would say, is a bit of a limitation. The case supports up to a micro ATX motherboard, which I would say is a limitation. Micro ATX motherboards are not popular, and with an ITX motherboard, it feels like half of the case is a bit wasted in terms of size. So compatibility for most micro ATX and ITX motherboards should not be a problem, given the modular design for the CPU block. But I do understand that going with an ATX motherboard support would make the case much larger, and it would require additional tooling for distribution blocks and cutouts of the actual frame, because that is where the water flows. You can actually see where the water channels are because of the aluminum covers on top, while on the right side we have that exposed 240mm radiator and a PSU chamber at the bottom that supports up to SFX power supplies. A drain port is included, it's right in front of the power supply. It's good that it's at the bottom so the liquid can simply exit, but it's in a really awkward spot for the liquid to drain cleanly. It's always been a mess every time I tried it. Size-wise, it's pretty compact, about the same height as my Corsair One, much smaller than the Asus Z11, and definitely much smaller than the mid tower, the 4000D Airflow. Now, this case concept and design first came out in 2018, which I think shows, to me, it looks a bit dated. I would love to see a more simplified approach and cleaner lines and less gamery aesthetic. I actually think the case looks better without the additional external silver pieces, which I think are a bit unnecessary and tacky. Also, as part of the external design, we have the capacitive touch power button that you slide from top to bottom to power on. As a concept, it's kind of futuristic, but on both the first and this replacement model, the power button did not work until I got the replacement button and actually swapped it out. Only then I could finally take advantage of the capacitive swipe. While on the right side below the radiator, we have the temperature meter that measures your water temperature inside the enclosure, and it's kind of cool as a concept, kind of futuristic, but you cannot reassign it to like display CPU temperature, and so in that it's very limited. There is an RGB controller behind the GPU that is SATA powered, into which you plug in the CPU block and the case lighting. Now, unfortunately, you cannot actually change the lighting effects. It's just constantly spinning rainbows, and that is just unacceptable for a 2020 release. You could disconnect them and plug them directly into your motherboard for software control, but that is one element that is really not well thought out here with the RGB lighting. It's just not acceptable. Moving on the list of non-acceptable items, some of the screws on the exterior that you have to remove in order to pop off the top panel were not all the same length, which I found really odd. There were also water spots around the enclosure, and the pump on my first unit did not actually work. I then realized that my first copy was not a fresh enclosure. It was first sent to someone else to work in, and they sent it to me. And so some of the misaligned of screws, that was actually a human error from the previous user. And I'm not sure what happened with the pump because it was really tight, because there are screws that you can untighten it. And so during shipment, we are told they over tightened the pump, which I find really weird because there's no liquid inside the case when it arrives to you. So it was one of those things where you have to kind of figure out what the hell's wrong with the case. And yeah, again, the experience is just not there. Not to mention, one of the screws had rust on it, which I found really bizarre, but after finding out that somebody else had worked on it, it all made sense. As for the CPU block, here are all the components. It is compatible with Intel 1200 and 11.5X socket plus AM4 with Ryzen. We have all the appropriate 90-degree fittings that you connect to the CPU block and the distribution plate, plus these extension tubes, small ones and large ones, that give you a lot of flexibility on how far the CPU block should be away or close to this distribution plate. And one really cool part here is that modular piece into which you connect the CPU block that gives you a lot of angular mobility. And as you can see here, the tubes are quite angled, but they might not be depending on your motherboard. So you could go straight down or move them both left or right. Because there's no instructions manual, I had to figure out how to mount the CPU block to the motherboard, which was, I mean, it's pretty intuitive if you've built a system with an AIO installation. I also have some water cooling experience, so figuring out the fittings was pretty self-explanatory, but for a product that is priced this high, you should expect some hand-holding from the brand to make sure you do not make any mistakes in the process. For example, this fill port on top side of the case, I actually mounted my 90-degree fitting there just to have some easier time when filling up the distribution plate inside the case. I had no idea how much liquid I needed to fill up. There's no instructions manual. There's no liquid that also is included with the case. So you need some DIY in there, either buy distilled water or some actual liquid coolant. And when I finally got it to work, this is the sound I heard. So this whole waterfall effect is definitely not natural. And that is because if you look at the design of the distribution plate inside the frame, you can see that the water, after it enters the CPU block, it exits and it drops into this opening that is basically the reservoir inside the frame. And obviously that fall of the water will produce this waterfall effect because it's not a gentle entry into the reservoir, it's actually literally falling. After several calls with the engineers, they assured me that this wasn't anything faulty, and perhaps if I put the top plate back on, it will dampen some of the sound, but obviously it didn't. On my second copy here, I'm experiencing exactly the same issue at 100% pump speed. Take a listen. Furthermore, I feel like the user experience element here has just been completely thrown out of the window because when it comes to the assembly, there's no cutouts behind the motherboard to route your 8-pin CPU cable, so all your cables, your 8 pins, the 24-pin, have to be almost exposed. And I did route them behind the reservoir tube, so at least they're somewhat hidden, but this isn't going to be a very pretty enclosure. The cables for the power button are short and are red and black, so obviously they're going to be visible and are difficult to hide. You also notice the case does not have any I/O aside from the power button, so all your USB connections, your audio will have to go through the motherboard. The case does not come with any fans, and that aluminum guard for the fans is just extremely tedious to mount. I understand the cool factor of this being an open style chassis, so GPU temperatures are totally under control, but my gosh, CPU temperatures are not any better than having a simple all-in-one on a standard ITX enclosure. And when I reduce the pump speed to 50%, it's really not good performance-wise. And I blacked out the GPU temperatures on purpose since they don't really matter given there's no restriction here. Which brings us to that last point about the price. I hope you've been on the edge of your seat until now, because this thing, my good people, is expected to hit at $1,000. it's been really difficult working with this case, knowing the price point and the complete lack in this regard to user experience and making sure that the user is satisfied from every level. On top of that, the cooling performance, even with this custom water cooling design, is just so bad, you might as well just spend $100 on an all-in-one cooler that will be better performing and will be 100% quieter too, plus it will come with fans. The only positive thing about this enclosure is that I hope companies take note and integrate something that uses open style concepts of maybe installing distribution plates inside the frame that is targeting water coolers, because this thing, the Zadak Moab 2 Elite, is just a complete waste. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Just be aware, it's not something I would recommend, and potentially in the future, if they improve on the design and the user experience elements, maybe, but still, $1,000 is a big, big no-no. Thanks so much for watching. Check out this other relevant content. Subscribe for more. I'll talk to you in the next video.